On an ordinary morning filled with unusual events on December 15, 2024, at a car dealership in Dallas, Texas, the quiet atmosphere of the office was suddenly shattered by a true spectacle. The employee, whom we shall temporarily call the Queen of Chaos, was caught drinking alcohol during working hours. She was immediately given a termination notice. But instead of leaving quietly, she decided to turn that day into an episode of a reality show called The Price of Daytime Drinking. The manager, tasked with handling the situation professionally, might have thought she was walking into just another day at work, with a few phone calls and signatures to handle. But instead of smooth car transactions, she found herself facing an unwilling actor who not only wanted to perform, but also wanted to take center stage in a play that no one had asked for. The manager tried to stay calm, applying all the conflict resolution skills she had been trained in, but things quickly escalated into a scene that was impossible to ignore. The girl, with the attitude, "I am the star, and this is my stage," refused to leave, trying to turn every glance into attention solely for her. She wasn't just an employee breaking the rules. She was a true performer, dressed in the oversized outfit of a fired employee and delivering a monologue never seen before. It seemed she had forgotten that this wasn't Broadway, but a car dealership where buying and selling cars was more important than expressing her injustice. And so, while other employees stood by and customers were confused, the car dealership, known for its attractive car deals, had now become the stage for an unwanted play that no one could look away from. Instead of gleaming cars, everyone only saw the sight of a well-dressed man trying to escort an artist out of the area. People may have come to see cars, but now they were being treated to a dramatic comedy show. Certainly, if there were an award for the funniest play of the year, this car dealership would be the host. The climax of the story occurred when things escalated from mild resistance to a tense standoff between the employee, manager, and police. The situation became dramatic when the employee, instead of listening to the advice of those around her, created further conflict. The police and manager patiently explained, but she refused to compromise, making everything worse. This was when the real tension began, as the girl not only resisted but also started blaming everyone around her. However, the humor came from the fact that she continued to perform as if everything were just a misunderstanding. The more she resisted, the more she resembled a comical character in a weird movie. This act of defiance wasn't just a humorous situation but also a lesson about not knowing when to stop, especially when you're trying to pull unwanted attention toward yourself. When all of the manager's softer approaches failed, and colleagues began to feel they couldn't breathe in the tense atmosphere, an unexpected event occurred. The final savior had arrived. But it wasn't some hero from customer service, it was the police. That's right, when all attempts at persuasion failed, and the manager's words were like water off a duck's back, one had to call the police. And so, at 0:49, an officer walked in with an expression that could have come straight out of a viral video about the weirdest job of the day. While he might have been prepared for anything, he certainly didn't expect the script he was about to face. Imagine the officer's expression when he walked into the room. His face wasn't that of a rescuer, but rather that of a new actor entering a scene in a dark comedy film. Instead of encountering a trembling criminal begging for mercy, he met a self-appointed lawyer, with an appearance that surely wasn't that of someone preparing for a trial. The girl wasn't just someone getting fired. She was a monument of blind confidence, fully believing she was the victim of a vast conspiracy, and that no one else but she understood justice. That was the moment when, if there were an award for Best Actress in a worse situation, she would surely have won it. She didn't hesitate when facing the police, turning the encounter into a trial where she could showcase all the superior legal knowledge she had gained from movies and online law courses. With unmatched confidence, she declared things that only main characters in dramatic movies would dare to say. The officer, who had probably never faced such a case before, couldn't help but feel as though he had stepped onto a humorous movie set, where justice could be found through bold words and eloquence rather than actual evidence. This scene wasn't just a normal dialogue, it was truly an extraordinarily lively performance. The employee didn't just ask a simple question, but with a serious face as though confronting the most dangerous criminal, not a police officer on duty at a car dealership. Her question, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" was asked with the most arrogant tone and attitude, making it seem as though she were standing on a podium at an international law conference, not an employee fired for drinking on the job. She had no fear or hesitation before the police's presence. On the contrary, she acted as though she were the one running the company, not the one about to be escorted out for breaking the rules. The reason she questioned the police's presence was even stranger and harder to understand. She declared that she didn't know why they were there, even though the answer was so obvious it could almost be printed on a neon sign, "Because you refuse to leave, ma'am." Surely, everyone in the company, from the CEO to the staff, was trying to suppress their surprise and sarcasm as she asked this question. The very looks around her, filled with confusion and disbelief, already answered her question clearly. But she refused to accept it. In fact, she was making things harder for herself by deliberately playing the victim in a situation that no one but her seemed to be aware of. She should have understood why the police were there, but instead, she pretended not to, as if she were acting in a play where the police were mere extras yet to be broadcast. This not only made the situation illogical but also extremely funny, because she didn't realize that her termination and the presence of the police were the consequences of her own actions. She had sabotaged herself, and now she was blaming others for not treating her the way she thought she deserved. The attitude of "I have rights" and the blindness to reality created a situation that was both hilarious and unbelievable. And then, as she kept explaining, the situation became even funnier. Like a rebellious actress on stage, she not only failed to understand the situation but also took on the role of the victim of a grand conspiracy, when in reality she was just trying to delay the inevitable. This was a vivid lesson on how sometimes we can see a clear truth right before our eyes but choose to ignore it due to arrogance or lack of self-awareness. Imagine this scene. There she stands, eyes gleaming with confidence, while everyone around her can only sigh and exchange looks, unable to believe what's happening. But, oh no, this employee had no intention of stopping. With the confidence of someone who just watched an episode of Law and Order and considers themselves a legal expert, she entered the debate as if this were a national trial, not a real-life resolution in a car dealership. Clearly, she didn't care about the real reason the police were there. That was secondary, because for her, life was a stage, and she was at the center, with all the lights shining on her. Who needs the truth when you can create a dramatic performance like this? She didn't stop arguing, offering bizarre reasoning about rights, justice, and personal freedom, while those around her could do nothing but stand in silence and count the minutes passing by. Each of her words felt like a part of a crime movie script, with her as the leading star and the police as mere pitiful side characters. The fact that she had just been fired for drinking on the job seemed to be irrelevant to her, because who cares about such trivial details? She had decided to be the hero of her own story, and nothing could stop her. While she spoke with the poise of a defense attorney in a famous trial, the police could only stand there, exchanging glances, checking their watches, and wondering whether they should add acting skills to their resumes. This scene was no different from a rehearsal for a play, where everyone around could only look at each other with bewildered eyes, unable to believe what was happening. And as the employee continued to perform her debating skills mercilessly, you begin to wonder if she even realized that not every situation could be solved with a passionate debate and legal theory. It was like a comedy show where no one admits they are playing, and the one thing that was certain, if there were an award for Worst Actor in a real-life situation, she would definitely win the gold medal. As for the police, they might want to start practicing patience and adding a little legal knowledge to their CVs to avoid being left behind in similar situations in the future. This story, already full of drama and strangeness, reached new heights of humor when the employee suddenly declared that she wasn't just a regular employee who had been fired, but also a law student and legal assistant. Or at least, that's what she claimed, while her confident gaze made you wonder if she was standing at a podium or just preparing for a final exam. As someone who has just finished an online legal class, she entered the conversation with a confident demeanor, as if she were standing before a crucial Supreme Court hearing, with all the top lawyers in the world waiting to hear her speak. While the police were simply tasked with making the situation orderly, this employee became the lead presenter, confidently interrogating them as if it were a criminal investigation, a questioning in which she had full control. With a barrage of legal questions echoing like thunder, she started making everyone around her feel like they were attending a Basic Legal Principles for Beginners seminar. Unfortunately, the questions she posed were like a faulty PowerPoint presentation, long-winded, convoluted, and not very clear. The legal terms she used resembled vocabulary that a law student might use, but perhaps that was the greatest comedy of all. The police, with expressions of patience, were probably wondering whether they should re-enroll in a basic legal theory course to avoid being overwhelmed by these incredibly difficult questions. This employee was creating a legal drama with a font error that could make anyone present hold their breath, with one question in mind. Could she actually become a real lawyer, or is she simply someone who has watched too many episodes of Suits and forgotten that life can't always be solved by delivering a lengthy monologue on rights and law? "Give me your badge number, full name, and your bar number," she demanded, with such seriousness that you could imagine her commanding a famous courtroom where she would argue against a team of seasoned lawyers. However, there was one small problem she seemed to have overlooked. Bar number is not something the police need to have. Yes, you heard that right. The bar she was asking for is something reserved for lawyers, those authorized to practice law, not police officers trying to make her understand that staying in the company is not the most reasonable solution, and certainly not the way to avoid an additional charge of trespassing. The police, unshaken, looked at her as if they'd just been invited to a reality show they'd never heard of, gently replied, "I don't have a bar number." Yes, that was the answer she never wanted to hear, but it was a completely reasonable and normal one. The police don't need a bar number to carry out their duties, but perhaps this employee thought she was in a global legal battle where every little detail, such as badge numbers or bar numbers, could make a difference. With the confidence of someone who just took an Intro to Law online course, she started to feel as if she had entered a Law and Order-style mind game, where every question, every request, had a value. She was certain that, with just a little more information, she could charge the police for not providing enough legal documentation, even though, in reality, she was causing trouble simply by refusing to leave the company. Instead of realizing that the situation was escalating into an unintended drama, she persisted in justifying her actions with a series of legal terms that sounded smart but had no real connection to the situation she was facing. She spoke as though she were presenting at a seminar on the power of the law, declaring that she had studied law and worked as a legal assistant for a year, with a tone of pride as if she had just won a Nobel Prize in law. Sure, this statement could make someone think she was an up-and-coming legal scholar, but in reality, it sounded more like a joke from a comedy movie. She didn't realize that, rather than being seen as a goddess of justice fighting for fairness, she was receiving stifled laughter, looks from everyone around her. Especially from the officer, who was probably thinking, if she studied law, then I must be an astronomy PhD. The police officer, who was carrying out a clear mission, getting her out of the area she was occupying, was now caught in a legal debate that came with no reward other than trying not to laugh at her naivety. Although the legal terms she used sounded powerful, they had no relevance to her situation. She might have thought she was interpreting profound laws that would change the course of this case, but in fact, she was just falling into the trap of self-delusion, causing everyone around her to shake their heads and try to stay calm. While she thought she was a skilled lawyer, she was more like an actor trying to play a character in a play no one wanted to watch. As things seemed to be coming to a dead end, the employee decided to go big with a very popular tactic among young people nowadays: "My mom will come and solve this." With the confidence as if her mother were the attorney representing the entire building, she declared that her mom was on the way to pick her up. Looking at her, you could imagine her mother as the only one who could save the day, like a superhero in shiny armor, on her way to rescue her daughter from the police. She was certain that with the power of maternal love, everything would be sorted out in an instant, and this was just a regrettable misunderstanding. However, the only problem here was, her mom wasn't coming. Yes, after the police checked and confirmed that no one was on their way, everything slowly started to fall apart. Perhaps, upon hearing her daughter's story, this poor mother decided that staying home, sipping tea, and watching her favorite show sounded much more reasonable than rushing out to rescue her daughter, who had gotten herself into this mess. And honestly, no one could blame her. With a daughter in such a humorous situation, surely the mother thought the smartest choice would be to let her daughter handle the problem herself. Once again, this proved that, no matter what she claimed, her mother was not the savior she had hoped for. In fact, the mother was probably just sighing while enjoying her cup of tea, thinking, "I'm sure I taught her how to avoid trouble, or maybe I forgot that lesson." But she didn't give up. When the call mom plan failed, she started asking for a phone, borrowing one from this employee and then that one, and even turning to the police, hoping someone would have mercy and lend her a phone. Of course, no one agreed. In everyone's eyes, this was not the right moment for her to recreate the phone call scene from Taken. Each time she was turned down, the employee tried to buy time as if she were an actress in an endless play, thinking that if she kept going long enough, a miracle would surely happen, or at least, she could turn this into a live TV interview, with cameras focused on every exciting moment of hers. It was as if she were participating in a reality show called, "Who Will Be the First to Fall into the Trap They Created?" Every word she spoke was not an apology or regret, but a mystical justification, as if by dragging things out just a little longer, the truth would change, and everything would be fixed. Unfortunately, this wasn't a reality TV show, and there were no prizes for who could create the funniest situation of the day. The police, despite dealing with a situation more bizarre than anything they'd ever imagined, maintained the patience of a kindergarten teacher teaching kids how to line up. They just stood there, looking at each other, checking the time, and perhaps wondering whether they could request overtime for this job, because clearly, this wasn't a typical task in their schedule. This situation not only made them feel like they were in a live comedy show, but it also made them wonder, is this the only job in the world where time doesn't just drag on, but feels worse than waiting for final exam results? With every attempt she made to stretch out the conversation, the police clearly realized that this wasn't a law enforcement mission, but rather an experiment to see if they could stay calmer than she could. They were probably hoping time would pass faster, and they could add overtime to their acting career, a career they never signed up for. The drama officially shifted from refusal to leave to dramatic resistance, when the police, who finally realized they were part of a reality show no one wanted to be in, asked the employee to leave the area. But instead of realizing that her journey had come to an end, this employee decided it was time for her show to reach its climax. With confidence that could have won an Oscar for Best Actress in the role of someone who will never leave, she began to perform new resistance tactics. She didn't just stand still like before. Now she moved on to a new, dramatic, and equally humorous tactic, blaming others. She started complaining that everything was a premeditated plot, a collaboration between the company and the police to frame her. She claimed that they had been planning for a long time to push her out of the company and were now just waiting for the chance to make her look like a loser. Who knows, maybe she imagined that in every soap opera there would be a dramatic scene at the last minute, and she was the star of that scene. She turned the situation into an endless monologue, portraying herself as the victim of a deep conspiracy that no one present could understand. Meanwhile, those witnessing it could only look at each other, struggling to suppress curious looks. Is this a scene from a show? Is she really blaming everyone else for her own actions? The police stood there, perhaps wondering if they needed to add her legal rebuttal to the file, as she presented it so well that everyone might think she was applying for a job as a lawyer. Clearly, she viewed this not just as a battle with the company and the police, but as a star-studded race on the small screen, where every word and gesture could become the highlight of the show. And perhaps she didn't realize that, while she was trying to rewrite the story like a TV drama, everyone around her only saw a tragicomic tale, where she was the main character in a play with no audience and definitely no rewards. This is the fault of this company. This is the fault of you officers. You're all unjust, she shouted, gesturing wildly as though she were the lead in a Hollywood revenge movie. Her way of blaming was so impressive that if someone walked in unaware of the situation, they might think she had just been falsely accused in some political scandal. The police, who were used to handling tense situations, now faced a far more difficult challenge. Keeping a straight face as the girl turned everything into a contest of who's the biggest victim? Perhaps the most memorable moment was when she declared that the handling of the situation was unprofessional, a truly ironic complaint from someone who had turned the car dealership into the stage for an unintentional comedy. When the police's patience finally wore thin, the employee was invited to embark on a short but uncomfortable journey, the police car. Arrested for refusing to leave and resisting, she still didn't forget to express her justified outrage. With the demeanor of someone making a press statement, she continuously complained that she was being treated unfairly. "I'm suing. The whole company is going to be sued," she screamed, raising her hand to the sky as if the goddess of justice was listening. This line probably made the onlookers bite back their laughter. The company might be sued, but perhaps for the reason of enduring the longest comedy performance of the year. As the police tried to escort her out, they were met with her creative resistance, stepping on feet, pulling arms, and clinging to the desk as if bidding farewell to her beloved workplace. All of this only made the arrest drag on and become even more ridiculous. But the climax came when she screamed, "I have a clean record," as though that statement alone could make the handcuffs open. Unfortunately, a clean record doesn't erase charges of trespassing or resisting arrest. The police probably thought, "Clean record? Great, but not after today." The performance had reached its conclusion, but the employee decided not to step back in her role as the indomitable lead. Arrested on charges of trespassing and disturbing the peace, she still managed to leave her mark, by continuing to threaten to sue both the company and the police. If there were an Oscar for most hilarious statement in a situation that can't be more serious, she would certainly be a strong contender. As she was escorted from the scene, she yelled, "This whole company will pay. You officers aren't exempt either." Her tone both furious and with a hint of a Marvel supervillain persona. But instead of facing superheroes, she was up against local police and the harsh reality of the law. The onlookers didn't know whether to feel sympathy or burst out laughing. Even as she was loaded into the police car, she boldly proclaimed she would get justice, as if she were being taken to a legal conference, not a detention center. The police, probably already used to such threats, silently closed the car door, giving her time to reflect on her way to the holding facility. And with a touch of irony, perhaps someone thought, at least she'll have an interesting story to tell in future law classes, if she ever gets in. This story is not just a humorous situation full of tragicomic twists, but also a lesson in patience and the importance of knowing when to stop. While this employee may have thought she was fighting for justice, the reality showed that resistance not only caused disruption but made things more complicated. The lesson here is, don't let pride or anger dictate your actions in awkward situations. Moreover, no matter how much legal knowledge you have, sometimes the key to avoiding unnecessary trouble is choosing the reasonable and calm response. And lastly, if you want to sue, make sure you're not the one getting arrested first.